so that was 18.4. Two more. And now these last two rules inside when boats meet, they are the obstruction rules. And I think it's easiest to remember these two obstruction rules. 19 is room to pass an obstruction. 20 is room to tack at an obstruction. So, every once in a while people get confused. They say, oh yeah, 19, room to tack an obstruction. No, it's the other way around. Room to pass at the obstruction is 19, room to tack at the obstruction is 20. And I think it might be easiest for people to try to think of it this way. If you're walking down the street and there's an obstruction in front of you, it is probably easier to kind of sidestep and pass through rather than change your course, go 90 degrees this way and do what we would do in sailing is tacking, and then tack back. So two tacks versus a slight duck. So first option would be to pass the obstruction. Second option would be to tack at the obstruction. So we pass in 19, we tack in 20. If it helps you to think of that analogy, great. Or come up with something else, let me know. 19.1, A and B. So here is how this is going to play out. Let me roll my screen here. Okay, so whenever we deal with obstructions, we're talking to two or more boats that have to keep clear of an obstruction. And we'll get into this in a little bit, but 90% of the time when we are racing on the short course, the obstructions that we are going to find are right-of-way boats. So we'll talk about it in a minute here. But for boats that do coastal racing, or you might be doing some kind of twilight racing, navigation type races in your local fleet with big boats, yeah, absolutely, you may have to honor a rock mark or something that might be an obstruction in the water. So yes, 19 is dealing with between boats that have to deal with obstructions. Okay, but Rule 19 applies between two boats and at an obstruction, except when the obstruction is a mark the boats are required to leave on the same side. Okay, and then B, when Rule 18 applies between the boats and the obstruction, is another boat overlapped with each of them. So when we are inside Rule 18, and let's say we're going downwind, and here's our mark. So this is the second part here. When we are inside Rule 18, we can't use Rule 19 and say, oh wait, there's a starboard tack boat with the right of way. I need room to duck or tack at the obstruction. In our case, it's room to pass the obstruction. So you can't say I need room to duck this obstruction or pass the obstruction. So yeah, when we're inside Rule 18, can't use Rule 19. And that first part, when the obstruction is a mark, the boats are required to leave on the same side. So so Rule 19 doesn't apply when we're trying to leave a mark on the same side. So essentially the same thing again. Rule 19 doesn't apply there. So 19.2, here we are, A and B. This describes giving room at an obstruction. All right, so here's how we're going to give room at an obstruction. All right, like I said, and I'm going to use this as the primary example here. Most of the time, when we are sailing on the short course in dinghies, we are going to see a starboard tack. We'll call this, this is our right-of-way boat, our rowboat, starboard tack rowboat, and perfect example of how to deal with passing obstruction. Here is a port leeward and port windward. Okay, not a very nice W. Hopefully a little better. Okay, both of these boats need to deal with this obstruction. When we are inside Rule 19, it comes down to the right-of-way boat of the two that have to deal with the obstruction. It is their call. So the right-of-way boat between these two is the port leeward boat. If the port leeward boat decides to duck, they must give room to the windward boat. And that is how passing an obstruction works between two boats or more on the racecourse. Rule 19, many people wonder, do we have to hail? No. The only time we really have to hail in sailing, in our racing rules of sailing, is when we get inside Rule 20, room to tack an obstruction. Here, there is no requirement for the leeward boat to hail to the windward boat. I'll give you room, I'll do whatever, I'll let you pass through. Just know that if you do decide to duck, you must give the windward boat enough room. Personally, do not like ending up in a room. So if you are either one of these boats, I would open up the lines of communication. If we're sailing in close proximity and the breeze is, under 20 knots, you should be able to yell, you should be able to communicate. But for the leeward boat, it is absolutely not a necessity, but it absolutely can help them. Because sometimes it's just to their benefit to know if they need to let that other boat in or they're planning to tack away. So that is how the communication works between these two boats, but yeah, just making sure we keep clear of the starboard right-of-way boat. Okay. Okay, and then C, we were discussing 19 earlier and a continuing obstruction. So if you're following in the rule book, we're 19.2C right now. And this is an interesting one. So if we do have a continuing obstruction, if we have a boat following along a continuing obstruction, if another boat, a boat from clear behind, decides to pass between a boat clear ahead and an obstruction, if they decide to put their bow in there, at the moment the overlap happens, and at the moment they become overlapped, if there is not enough room for the boat behind to fully fit in there, they are then going to be violating 19.2C because the boat that was trailing along with the continuing obstruction does not have to alter course to allow them to fit. If there is enough room for the boat behind to fit, great, they are allowed in there. But they are not entitled to room in there if there is not enough room for them to fit. So essentially what the rule is saying is if the leeward boat comes from behind, they can't force the windward boat up and away to give them room between the windward boat and the obstruction. If there isn't room to fit and they go in there, they're easily going to be violating 19.2C. And that is how we deal with a continuing obstruction, going all the way back to part of 18, wherever that is now. Okay. So we are almost to the end here, getting into room to tack and obstruction. And the first line sets us up. A boat may hail for room to tack and avoid a boat on the same tack. However, she shall not hail unless she is approaching an obstruction and will soon need to make a substantial course change to avoid it safely. So, yes, let's draw this in again. We will have here's our starboard rowboat, starboard right-of-way boat, and now we're going to add in a port leeward, and we now have a port windward. Okay, so we're all set up here. This part A, she is approaching an obstruction and will soon need to make a substantial course change to avoid it safely. So this boat doesn't have to hail to the windward boat until she knows that she's going to have to make a substantial course change, and she's approaching it rather quickly. Otherwise, she can just keep going. So basically, we don't have to say this too early, right? There's only a penalty when we do it a little bit too late, but she doesn't have to early on. So that's the one part that sets us up for actually hailing. And the other part is she doesn't have to unless she's sailing close hauled or above, right? So if we're reaching, she doesn't have to hail for a room to tack if she's reaching. So if she's close hauled or above, she can then hail and then require the windward boat to go into attack. But if she's reaching, it does not apply. Okay, so that is the hailing part. I like to kind of put all of this in motion now, 20A through 22E, right? There's a pretty smooth and efficient means of communication to make this whole thing work, and we're going to go through it right now. So, here we go. Starboard right-of-way boat, and we have our other two. As the port leeward approaches the starboard right-of-way boat, they, as we just said, they need to hail to the port windward. What they need to do is identify that there's obstruction and the need to tack. Most commonly, people say, starboard tack boat, got to tack. You could say, obstruction, got to tack, something along those lines, but you need to tell the port windward that there is an urgency to tack. Once the hail is made, the port windward has one of two options. They can either tack away immediately and be done with the situation, or they can respond to the port leeward and say, you tack. If they say you tack, then the port leeward's responsibility is to tack and keep clear of the starboard right-of-way boat, and then the only responsibility left is for port windward to tack and keep clear of the old port leeward. Okay. There is a small caveat to this whole scenario, and the responsibility falls on the starboard right-of-way boat. If the starboard right-of-way boat tacks within, say, 4 seconds of encountering the port leeward, and let's also add in that there are many other windward boats above port leeward, this starboard right-of-way boat would, yes, acquire the right-of-way, Rule 15, to port leeward, but port leeward needs to be given the time for the port windward to respond, and then again for this conversation to occur, and then this conversation to occur, this conversation to occur. So 4 seconds is not nearly enough time for port leeward to keep clear, because port leeward had to deal with a communication issue here, and then so on and so forth. So it might be that starboard right away needed to have that right away for a minute or more, just so all these guys can communicate, if that's how it panned out. We rarely see that, but it might be 2 or 3 boats. But anyway, can't make that quick tack and expect everybody to keep clear. I believe there's one more little part for us. Just passing on a hail that is 20.3, and I will read it. When a boat has been hailed for room to tack and she intends to respond by tacking, she may hail for another boat on the same tack for room to tack and avoid her. She may hail even if her hail does not meet the conditions of Rule 20.1, 20.2 applies between her and the boat she hails. Okay, so hopefully all of this makes a good bit of sense, and quite a few of those, I can think of a couple of these here, E being the, oh, do I have overlap? Maybe I don't have overlap scenario going into the leeward mark. Reasonable doubt, F being the boat that tacks to windward of another boat and not being able to give room, are so many of these that actually just absolutely make sense. Tacking in the zone, jibing. These are the rules that make 18 not apply. It's hopefully you guys have gotten a lot of it. But thank you for watching, and hopefully we'll do a few more videos.